week 13 actually for this passion project of mine. And, you know, it just stands to reason that you're part of this initial push for me in this whole integrative wellness collective, because I've been watching your journey online and on Instagram, and I've been really seeing what you do, not just for the community, but for just in general, how you live your life and your commitment and your connection to animals. And just, I just felt that this whole love your brain thing would have been such a cool thing for me to understand what you do, just coming from a space of being a healer myself and also as a PT. But I found that it just is kind of apropos for what I know of the integrity that you embody. So I'm so blessed and honored to have you here. I'm super excited to talk with you tonight about this. But so let me just tell everyone about how incredibly awesome you are. And so Jamie started her yoga practice in 2012. And I have to say, you were fairly young at the time, right? Like, what an incredible leap of faith for you to know that you were going into a profession at such a young age, and then kind of like take it all by the horns and be like, I'm forging ahead and I'm going to make this incredible yoga program. And again, watching you grow in the trajectory of seeing this is just incredible, because you obviously have found your calling in life, which not many of us find. I mean, I'm almost 50, and sometimes I think about what I could have done differently or what I would have done differently. I'm so blessed to do what I do, but to find it at such a young age is, I mean, it's definitely like a soul calling, soul connection. So you have what I was looking through your website, and I found it so cool because you have these variety of classes that work on, you know, emotional well-being, anxiety issues, trauma sensitivities. You don't see that a lot. Like when I think the majority of people look at yoga, it's kind of like this asana practice and maybe some meditation. But if you're lucky enough to get into a class with a yoga teacher that is maybe kind of, I almost think about it as like a prophet almost. You go in, listen, I grew up Catholic. I'm a non-Catholic goer at this moment, but I remember being in churches on Sundays and listening to a priest talk about a homily. And I remember going to yoga classes when I was able to go before COVID, and almost praying that the teacher would speak to me on some almost like a prophet level. And that's what usually happens. And I think when you go to yoga classes, if you find a great teacher, you experience that moment of like, I can't believe they just said that, because it's what I've been going through all week. And it's like, now all of a sudden there's all this clarity. So, you know, thank you for bringing your gifts to the world and to us in Rockland, and to me tonight, and to the people that are going to be on. But just tell us about who you are and the gifts that you share. What is it that you give to the world right now?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Yeah. That means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so like you said, I opened my studio when I was really young. I opened it when I was 20. Which
the guts. I love it.
Yes, absolutely. And it took, I always say it's like the only time I was ever truly fearless in my whole life. But I also do always tell people that I was 20 years old. So I didn't have, you know, like a mortgage payment or like, you know, a family to support. So I was lucky in that way, where I was, you know, I was able to experiment. And if it didn't work out, I knew that I didn't have that much to lose. However, like you also said, I absolutely knew, actually the moment I observed a yoga class for the first time, that's when I knew. I was like, I was in teacher training and I knew I wanted to teach yoga. But then when I observed a yoga class, when I just watched the teacher teach it and the students just move, like, it was like nothing I'd ever seen. And I just sat there and cried, and I immediately knew, like, okay, this is not only what I am gonna do, but this is going to be the rest of my life forever. So yoga was, you know, the opening for everything else to kind of fall into place. So I started off teaching more advanced asana, poses. And again, I was a 20-year-old, so I was able to do all the fun, crazy, wild things.
Yeah.
That,
Stand on your head, bend over backwards.
Exactly. Totally. Exactly. And then it wasn't until I actually got a back injury from doing all the wild and crazy things over and over and over again that I really had to like slow down my own practice. And then I realized that the gentle yoga, adaptive yoga scene really wasn't there as much as I wanted it to be. So I started teaching more gentle yoga, just exploring different styles of yoga that were just easier to adapt. But it really wasn't until I did the Love Your Brain training that I was like, oh, okay, this is where everything, comes into play. So that really allowed me to just, again, adapt my practice for that population, but it also just opened my eyes to so much more. So then I also got trained to teach yoga to individuals who are experiencing substance abuse, depression, PTSD, anxiety, eating disorders. So that was like the next piece of the puzzle. And yeah, my whole practice and my whole life is just rooted in how I can give back. I teach this, of course, I make a living from it. I'm able to survive and sustain myself. But my number one reason for teaching yoga is just because I know that it saved my life. So I just want to share it and give it to everyone and use the tiny platform that I do have as a business owner to do all the good that I possibly can. So
I think that's a thread between all of us that are some sort of like healthcare workers, that we care about other people's health and wellness. We've all come to our profession. It's like the hero's journey, right? Like we've all had some sort of issue or fall, and then we were raised up and given a platform to heal from. And it was so profound for us that we're now giving this other opportunity for other people to heal. I mean, I know for me, acupuncture was the change agent for me to get through my 9/11 experience, as a 9/11 survivor. So if it wasn't for my experience of being an acupuncturist and going through that, I don't think I would be the healer or the empath that I am at the moment, just because of my own personal experience. So yeah, it's the whole idea of healer, heal thyself, right? It's pretty powerful. So I want to dive right in because I want to talk to you about this Love Your Brain. When I first started out as a PT, my first experience as a practitioner was at Bellevue Hospital. And I spent my first 2 years as a young PT working on traumatic brain injured patients. So when I found out you were doing this, it was just such an interesting concept for me, because I'm like, it was so hard as a PT to get someone to go from having a very traumatic experience where they're in a coma to watching them leave the hospital a year later, walking with deficits, having cognitive issues, but really wondering, in this case with Love Your Brain, where does your program fit into this whole gigantic scale of somebody that has gone through their traumatic brain injury? So tell us about the Love Your Brain program and how you were compelled to bring it to your studio. Like, how did it fall in your lap, essentially? Because you're the only one in New York State, right? That
I actually think that there was just recently one studio in New York City.
Wow.
Which is awesome. Yeah.
So awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome. So tell us about it, and how did it wind up with you?
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting that you say, where I really had little to no idea of what really was entailed when someone said a traumatic brain injury. And so when Lee, one of our, I don't know if you probably know Lee LeBrake.
Yes.
But yeah, so she is a snowboarder.
Yes.
And the founder of the Love Your Brain Foundation um, had a traumatic brain injury while snowboarding. So she followed his whole journey. And then that was in 2009. And then in 2014, he and his brother and his family developed this whole Love Your Brain Foundation. And she was one of the first people in the world to get trained with the Love Your Brain program. And then she did the training and came back to the studio and was like, oh my God, Jamie, like this is absolutely amazing. And I, at the time, and still am dating my partner, Andres, who is also a physical therapist working in neurology. So
yeah.
I was like, and he's also a certified yoga teacher. So we went out to San Diego and got trained together. And because we had 3 teachers that were already, you know, certified, they were able to send 2 people down to New York from Vermont and inspect our studio and make sure that it was up to Love Your Brain qualifications. And before the pandemic hit, we were, you know, teaching the program, you know, 3 or 4 times a year. But so the whole idea, and it's again interesting that you said what you said before, the whole reason why the Love Your Brain yoga program was you know, designed and originated was because they wanted to bridge that gap between, so like when you get a traumatic brain injury, usually like your immediate care is pretty good, and then you do some sort of maybe inpatient rehabilitation and then some outpatient, and then once your, you know, your sessions are up, insurance doesn't give you extra or whatever it is, you're kind of like, okay, you're on your own now. And as you and I know, traumatic brain injuries don't just, you know, your symptoms and how you're reacting to it doesn't just stop once you're done with physical therapy. So their idea was to give people something to explore, to continue their therapy after outpatient PT or OT. And then, so how the program works is, so it's yoga, meditation, breath work, and facilitated group discussion, which is like
amazing.
Is absolutely amazing. Yeah. Sure. So it's not just this, you know,
movement.
Exactly. It's not just movement. It's the whole package, and the group discussion is honestly like the best part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a 6-week series, and it's free for individuals who have had traumatic brain injuries and their caregivers, which I think is amazing. So again, free for people with TBI and their caregivers. And each week has a different theme. And, you know, the guidelines of teaching yoga for someone who's had TBI is pretty specific, but also has the ability to, you know, adjust and adapt depending on who's in the class. But yeah, and we were, again, teaching that before the pandemic. We were teaching that program 3 to 4 times a year.
Wow. Did you have many people come to the program? Are they finding you? How, I mean, it's such a rare program, it feels like, especially on the East Coast. So yeah. Where are they finding you? How are they getting to you?
So I was concerned about that too. I was like, how is anyone going to be able to find like our small little studio and know that we have this program? So Love Your Brain also does a really great job at making relationships with hospitals, making relationships with clinicians.
Yeah.
Like clinicians can even, as a PT, as an OT, you can actually do the Love Your Brain training as again, as a clinician. So because Andres works at Helen Hayes, we did, it was just the perfect marriage of it all. Yeah. So we actually did an in-service at Helen Hayes with all of his employees and just got them familiar with the program. Yeah. They were able to ask questions, and you know, they all have like flyers and now they know about the program. So I'll tell Andres, okay, we have a 6-week series coming up. Let your coworkers know. And yeah, a majority of our students were people from Helen Hayes Hospital, and the Love Your Brain Foundation has grown quite a bit. So you can always go on their website and just look up your location, and then they'll show you which studios in your area are teaching this program. So some people have done that.
Can you tell the people out there what type of deficits you see in the people that wind up coming to your yoga practices or these programs? What are the deficits you're looking at? Or what's a typical deficit that you're seeing somebody after a traumatic brain injury?
Right.
At this level where they're at, where they're coming?
Right. So how the program currently works is you have to be able to walk without any assistance, so no wheelchair or cane. So we, again, the thing I learned most about traumatic brain injury once I dove into all of this was that every single person experiences a TBI completely different than the next. There's not one person who has the same, side effects or anything.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of light sensitivity, migraines, sound sensitivity, even smell. So when we're doing the Love Your Brain program, we don't have any scented candles in studio. We don't have any fresh flowers in studio. Blinds are always closed. The lights are dim. But what I think I see, again, because you'll see every side effect possible in the group. But what I think is the most common thing that we see is this lack of community and lack of support and being around people who know what you're going through. And that's why, again, the group discussion at the end has been, I think, the most powerful part of my experience of teaching this program. Because, TBI, we say it all the time, is an invisible injury. So these individuals are walking around in their daily life and they can walk fine and they can have a conversation with you, and you have no idea that their vision is doubled, or that the smell of your perfume is completely triggering them. So we hear a lot that people are, just feel alone when it comes to being diagnosed with a TBI. So that support system is huge. And we've had a lot of people go out to lunch before the program or after the program. And, it's really nice to see them make connections and even share resources and doctors. And it's really nice.
I think it's an interesting thing because the statistics are crazy in terms of how many people have experienced traumatic brain injuries. And I think one things is just even concussions, and I don't think people even realize that a concussion can be considered a traumatic brain injury. And, I was working with the New York Giants at one point in my career, and I was working with one of the trainers that had come back. And he was talking about working with the NFL post, when these football players leave the NFL, and how many times they experience these post-concussive issues, but it almost becomes a degenerative, cognitive, traumatic experience. So they can have after effects or rebound effects 10, 15, 20 years later, where they're having cognitive problems. They have aggressive issues. They have all these things, they can't even balance a checkbook because they had so much damage to the brain that it became a degenerative neurological problem. So before this week, I was kind of diving into some of the statistics on brain injuries. And one of the things that they talk about is, young kids that want to play football at young ages, the brain is still developing at the age of 12. So for these young kids that are in football camps at 12, 13, their brains are still developing. So even though they're wearing headgear, they're experiencing trauma to the brain, and then compounding itself over decades. They have, more of a likelihood to have degenerative brain disorders towards, their 40s and 50s than if they, played at a later time when their brain wasn't developing. So I had put out a question on the Instagram stories about, what's the most common way of achieving a traumatic brain injury, and most people got confused. They actually said stroke, and stroke isn't necessarily a traumatic brain injury. It's a non-traumatic brain injury. So it's not coming from an external source. So I think our society has this disconnect between, if there's something going on in your brain, it must be related to a stroke. So can you talk to us about that? Because do you have patients or clients or yogis, so to speak, coming into your practice that have had other non-traumatic brain injuries like strokes? And do you see that there's any similarity between their deficits or their limitations?
Yeah, so we were really lucky in that Love Your Brain made a few exceptions for our studio, because we did have honestly access to Andres, and he taught because how the program works is there's a lead teacher and a co-teacher. So he was my co-teacher for the first few times that we did the program. So they allowed people into our program who had strokes, Parkinson's. We had someone who had meningitis, which then affected their brain. And we had, someone who had cancer and then had a stroke. So we have definitely seen that a handful of times. And it's also, this program has given me that confidence that I also open up my gentle yoga classes to individuals with Parkinson's or any other, type of neurological diagnosis that, I personally would feel comfortable teaching. But yeah, there are certainly similarities in what we see. Again, every individual is so different that, sometimes it can present in, a lack of balance. It can be, not being able to use one of their limbs fully and completely. But again, it's really nice to be able to, open up group classes to the Love Your Brain population and any other neurological diagnosis, because it also then starts to get them back into the community. So yeah.
So I love this. And now, how about, how many people are in your program at a time? Because I know you're also creating community, right? So you're helping each of them create a community with each other, so they each have each other's back, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So again, before the pandemic, I think the max for Love Your Brain was 13, but again, they allowed us to have 15 at one point, which was, the studio was absolutely full. It was a pretty small space back then. So yeah, we usually had, I think our smallest group was maybe 7 or 8, which is amazing. And people are allowed to repeat the course if they want, but the whole goal really is once they complete this 6-week series, they can then come to the classes on the schedule that are labeled Love Your Brain friendly, and then they get to take those classes for $5 forever.
Oh, wow.
So again, just trying to bridge that gap of, okay, so you did this, this fundamental series with a group of individuals, and now you're ready to take what you've learned here and integrate it into into the more community group classes where it's not just people with TBI.
So, typically in a yoga class, there's a flow and there's a structure, right? And I think every teacher usually kind of has their own way of either starting on the ground or ending standing in a balance pose, or starting in a balance pose and ending on the ground. So when you take somebody that's been through some sort of traumatic brain injury, what is the structure that you're taking them through? And then what are the adaptations that you find, or what are the hardest things for them to accomplish?
Yeah, so how I organize it, how Love Your Brain organizes their program is, so you start off with just like sitting at the front of the room and just kind of letting the entire class know like what the theme is going to be, what the goal is going to be, saying, I'm going to guide you through some breath work, our physical practice, and then meditation. And the theme is resilience, or whatever it was for that week, so that they just kind of know what they're getting into. Nothing is too much of a surprise. The class is a lot of, more basic, simple stretches,
Sure.
Done on the back, seated, tabletop, some standing. My Love Your Brain classes usually didn't involve too many standing poses.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking like, such gentle yoga that we're literally just stretching and exploring the floor, our seat, and hands and knees.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as, adapting the practice, so like I said, scent wise, which normally like you walk into a yoga studio and you're like, oh, the incense are burning, this is so
Right.
lovely.
It'd be too much for them.
Right. Yeah. So like no incense, no flowers, no scented candles, dimming the lights, and not wearing any clothing that's too like busy or bright, just really wearing like simple colors. And then as far as the actual physical practice goes, the whole series, we repeat a lot of the poses so that they get familiar with it, they get comfortable with it, they get to learn it, so they can integrate it again, either into the Love Your Brain friendly classes or even at home. We don't fold over, we don't like tip the head all the way over, so no down dogs. Even in child's pose, we give the option to just place the hands on the forehead or a blanket. Sun salutations are very modified if we do those, so it would literally just be inhale, reach your arms up, and exhale, place your forearms on your thighs, again, not even letting the head drop down below the heart. And using a lot of props. So I usually, the first class of the series, will spend a good 5, sometimes even 10 minutes just being like, this is a block, and this is how you use it. And this is a bolster, and try sitting on it, try putting your leg on it. And yeah, so very prop heavy. And no, we don't really use Sanskrit, so we're not saying like, Tadasana or Surya Namaskar, or we keep it very, again, basic, but it's also great that Love Your Brain allows each teacher to kind of make it their own while still following the guidelines. So my classes tend to be very, spiritual and a certain feel and vibe, but so it's nice that I'm allowed to add some of my own into there while still following a pretty strict guidelines.
It takes me back when I was treating TBIs. One of the things that I was always so kind of blown away by is the integrity of spirit in terms of how much one wants to return to some sort of normalcy in their living experience. And whether, for people out there that may have never even seen someone go through a traumatic brain injury, it's quite a journey. And for those that have been injured before, which is probably all of us at some point, we understand what compensation means. If you hurt your back or you hurt your knee, you know what it's like to compensate, maybe changing your gait, changing your walking pattern. But when you have an insult in your brain, you might have the concept of wanting to do something, but then your body not recognizing the information, and you watch this experience happen of movement that was never your experience before. And when that disconnect happens, it can really affect the whole emotional system as well. So when you're recovering from something like, you know, a body injury, it's very different than recovering from a brain injury, because when you recognize the disconnect is when the whole emotional system and the anxiety, and then here you are living in the world, and like you said earlier, you might look normal from the outside, but there's a whole host of, you know, inflammatory processes that are going on the inside that really are taking you out of who you originally were. And it, you know, it's interesting. I remember back to a patient of mine. I'm going way back. I'm going back to like the late 1990s. I don't know how old you were back then. You definitely did not have a yoga studio then. But this is when New York City, we actually had payphones back then, like
Wow.
on the street corner. And I remember getting called in to see a patient. He had been sadly beaten at a telephone station where we had these phones that were like this metal attachment, and the phones were plastic, really heavy plastic. And he was in the Bronx somewhere, and he was mugged, and he had been beaten so badly with the butt of the plastic that he had a craniotomy. So when I went in to evaluate him after he came out of his coma, so the Ranchos Los Amigos scale is, I'm sure you know, it's a scale that you kind of work on cognitive function, like where somebody is in their ability to know what the hell is going on in their world. And this poor man was, it was so sad. He was shackled to his bed with his hands and his feet, and he had this massive indent, like a concavity in his skull. And he was in that space of confusion and agitation. So, you know, he was violent, and nobody sees any of that, right? They see when they kind of make their way out into the world. But when you watch somebody have these traumatic brain injuries, you can't imagine that person that was laying there and like throwing his feces because he was so agitated and he was so scared, and he had no concept of just his experience of where he was, and then all of a sudden 6 months later he's having a conversation with you and he's walking out. The brain is the most fascinating organ we have in this entire body system. So it's like, you want to talk about love your brain. I did a post on the glymph system. Are you aware of that system?
No, not.
System. It is literally the only way that the brain can detoxify itself. Wow. It is a detoxification system. It's called glymph, like glio, so brain, lymph. It's a detoxification system, and the only way that the brain detoxifies is through sleep. So if you're sleep deprived, you do not have access to rid your brain of toxins that you've amassed throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month, throughout your year. So when people are in sleep deprivation, they kind of go through these kind of toxic experiences. So it's just the brain is just such a fascinating thing. And then to see, you know, work with them on balance and coordination and you know, proprioception, right? The ability to know where your body is in space at any given time. We take these things for granted when we have them, when we have access to them, right? And then you experience them and watch them kind of go through that and have these, they're frustrated because maybe they can't move their leg or their arm, or they can't balance the way they used to. And you have to give credence to this emotional experience that they're having as well.
Right.
So tell us about the gentleman that had the brain injury, though, that started this whole Love Your Brain story. I watched the video. I mean, he was he went to the Olympics, or he was almost in the
He
Olympics?
was training for the Olympics, and he was, you know, projected to win everything that he could possibly win. And yeah, the year before, as he was training for the Olympics, that's when he got his traumatic brain injury. So
Unbelievable.
yeah, his name is Kevin Pierce. Him and his brother Adam Pierce started the Love Your Brain Foundation in 2009. And their whole goal was, how do we support, how do we create community, how do we create resilience? And actually in the Love Your Brain fundamental series that we do, we actually have a whole section on resilience versus recovery, because like you said, there are a handful of individuals who have a TBI and then will never fully recover, right? Whether it be, you know, something emotional, whether it be their migraines, whether it be cognitive, they may never fully recover and get back to where they were. But we talk a lot about resilience in the program. And again, that was like a key part of what you know, Kevin and Adam designed with this program. So
how do you describe resilience for them?
How do we describe
how do you describe resilience? What is that to you, to them, to their experience?
Yeah, so that's actually like the question that we ask in the group discussion is, right, like, what is resilience to you?
Give me some examples. What are you hearing from them?
So we hear that resilience is sometimes turning the lights off, staying in a dark room all day, and just taking care of themselves. Sometimes resilience is reaching out to a support group, reaching out to their family, their friends. Resilience to them is also trying something new. So most of the time people are experiencing yoga for the very first time, and here they are with a traumatic brain injury and trying yoga. I mean, I think that takes such courage. So yeah, so people usually are like, well, just being here shows that I'm being resilient. And really just taking every day by day. That's what we hear a lot too, is that everyone is really just taking every day by day, because you know, one of our students, I'm thinking in particular, who suffers from severe migraines. One day she's fine, she's good, she can go to work, she can do her thing, and then the next day she's in the ER with a migraine. So really just taking and assessing themselves every single day. And you know, of course, yoga is all about presence, and it's all about being in the moment. So as hard as it is to tell these individuals who are, you know, suffering from TBI, to just, you know, stay in the moment, be present, you know, everything's going to get better.
People that haven't had TBIs can't do that either. Exactly. Most of us can't. Yeah. It's very hard to be in the present. Very hard.
Absolutely.
And then to throw in, you know, a migraine or double vision or tinnitus ringing in your ears, or balance deficits, or, you know, forgetfulness, or, I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's a really difficult thing. And you know, you even think about now, just in the world of, you know, social media, and how easy we are distracted, right? And we've got a million things that go on, and, you know, you wonder why so many kids have ADHD, ADD, you know, they're so overstimulated, you know, autistic children that have sensory issues. I mean, we all have a part of that, you know, and these kinds of programs, I think, are so important, because at least it brings to light that type of issue and how you can work on that. But, you know, one of my most favorite things or abilities of the brain is plasticity, right? And, you know, for people out there that don't know plasticity, it's the ability for the brain to learn new things under active stimuli. So, you know, when you have an interest in something new, learning a new language or experiencing a yoga class for the first time or doing something that's so out of your ordinary, you know, it kind of puts the kibosh on you can't teach an old dog new tricks, because that is total BS.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, it doesn't matter how old you are, you have brain plasticity. You might be a little slower at learning it, right? You might have a little deficit in learning it, but you can still learn it.
Yep.
You know, the whole idea of like, what is it, neurons or nerves that fire together or wire together, fire together, right? So like, you can learn new motor patterns, you can learn new things just by creating repetition. And, you know, I think things like with your program, it's like learning. That's why repetition is so important, because you're creating that motor learning pattern, that neural programming that's important. How does a child learn?
Right.
They learn through repetition. I always found that, you know, post-traumatic brain injuries, it's literally like relearning the skills that you learned as a very young child.
Right.
You can't walk, you know, if you haven't crawled yet, right? You can't crawl if you haven't cruised yet. You know, you can't roll if you haven't lifted your head up first. So we have these neural developmental patterns that are so important. And I'm sure even for you as a yoga teacher, without looking at the TBI patient, you see so many people with deficits in strength and flexibility and the ability to balance. And if you roll that back into neurological developmental changes, you might be able to change one developmental pattern and their whole pattern changes for the good. So repetition is super important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. What's also really cool, and if you go on loveyourbrain.com, you can actually see, so they have done really incredible research on this 6-week series, and you can read all about it. But absolutely, you know, it's a very delicate balance that I need to, you know, I need to work with, right? In balancing, allowing people to work on their flexibility and their strength while getting frustrated at the fact that they can't stand the way that they used to, or, you know, being frustrated at the fact that, you know, again, most of the students are newer to yoga, but there have been students who were like lifelong yoga practitioners, had a TBI, and here they are having trouble with, you know, cats and cows and tabletop.
Yeah.
And that's really, really hard to, you know, come to. But yeah, the self-esteem enhancement that we see after this program, even just, you can see and you can feel how they walk out of the studio much different than when they walked in. You can, you know, we hear that, you know, stress is less, obviously balance, flexibility, and strength. And you know, it's so cool when a student will like message me and be like, so this one student, she was actually, she's dependent on a cane, so she walks with a cane, but again, she was one of our students. And a big like huge thing that she did, that she texted me and she was like, oh my God, I was able to bend down and pick up the dog poop.
Aww.
And I was like, that's amazing. Like, how cool is that? That just with some consistent
small little milestones.
Yoga.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Small milestones.
So that is just like, that's what makes all of it worth it. And that's what, you know.
I think one of the hardest things too, though, is this self-compassion, right? I mean, so many of us struggle so much, especially like just in the world that we live in. It's so fast-paced and we're always striving and goal-oriented and have to have all these things done, that I think one thing that most of us have a lot of trouble with is the self-compassion part, especially when we're recovering from something. And honestly, we're all recovering from something. All of us. Right? We're not in this world to fly and just be these perfect beings. I mean, we're all struggling somehow, striving to be some sort of perfection of ourselves and our highest good. But, we're all struggling with something. And I think when we struggle through that piece, the self-compassion part is where we need to really focus on. And especially when you're dealing with something of that magnitude of a deficit, right? Can you love your brain, but can you love yourself through that, right? I think that's one of the hardest things that we are with ourselves.
Absolutely. And again, it's so difficult for me because I just want to tell them that, right? I just want to, that's me. I'm like, oh, you have to love and accept and embrace. But if you tell someone that just recently had a TBI, like, you just have to accept the way it is, they're not going to be happy with, they're not going to be happy with me.
Not easy.
Yeah. And there were a few times where after the class, again, because Andres has 10 years of experience, with people who have had TBI, where he would say to me like, oh, like, that language that you used, or that little bit of, of what you said in the discussion could be considered like a little insensitive or anything like that, so even the language that I use has to be incredibly mindful, because I personally, I've never had a traumatic brain injury. So it's also hard for me to relate to them on that level, and say, just have self-compassion, you got this.
Right. And that's hard.
Yeah.
It's like whatever self-compassion means for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like anything. If you've never had cancer, you don't understand what it's like for somebody going through it, right? You can have compassion and empathy, but you will never know, God forbid. I mean, let's hope you never know, or we never know. And it brings me back to, I was talking to a patient about, I don't know, this was prior to 9/11 for me. She was suffering from severe panic attacks. Yep. And I was like, wow, what is, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, what do you mean? You just like have a panic attack? Like you can't breathe, your heart beating out of your chest? Like what triggers it? What's happening? And I had compassion and empathy, but I had no idea. 9/11 came, my PTSD kicked in, and I had my first panic attack. And I was wiped out from it. And I'm like, you've dealt with this for how long? Yeah. It was like this immediate, whoa, I totally get this. I totally get this, what you're going through. And man, this sucks.
Yeah. And honestly, sometimes, like, that's what the discussion circle will end up being, everyone just saying like, this sucks. Yeah. And that's part of the resilience key, and that's part of the building community, and that's part of being in the present, and really just living in your own truth, just to be able to say like, this situation really sucks right now, and that is what it is, and it's, again, a hard place for me to be in, to say like, well, you're going to get through it, so holding that space is, again, has made me, a better individual in general, but a better communicator, a better space holder when I do other teacher trainings or in any group setting. So yeah.
All right, well, tell everyone how to find you, how to find this program. You just moved to a beautiful new studio. Congratulations on that. It looks amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
How to find you?
Yeah, so you can just Google Jamie Surya Yoga, and all the things will pop up there. We're on social media, Instagram and Facebook, of course, Jamie Surya Yoga Studio, JamieSuryaYogaStudio.com for all of our class schedules. We're currently doing in studio, outdoors, and online.
Oh, great.
So, yeah.
Is there a restriction in your studio still with state?
Yeah, so we're still 6 feet apart. We wear masks the whole time. All the HEPA and air purifiers in here. So we're doing everything that we need to keep it super safe in here.
And when are you running your next Love Your Brain program?
So they haven't given us our next round of dates yet. However.
Oh, they give them to you.
Yeah, so usually everyone works on like a very set schedule. So all of the studios in the country are doing the program at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So as of right now, we don't have a next in-person program. However, Love Your Brain launched what's called the Love Your Brain Mindset, which is an online program for individuals who've had TBI and their caregivers. So there's two components of that. There's one where you can just tune in live on Zoom for the group discussion. There's also a yoga and group discussion. So both of those are live. And then there's another component of it where if you don't want to tune in live, you can just sign up and they send you like 4 different emails for 4 weeks of like mindfulness tools and, you know, meditation, breath work, yoga. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do online right now. Even if you go to their website, there's so many resources on there. And yeah, if you follow us on social media, you will, you know, find out when we'll be hosting the next session in studio. But I really, really strongly encourage anyone who has had a traumatic brain injury, or if you're a caregiver of someone who has, to really, really look into this program. It's absolutely incredible, and I feel beyond lucky to be able to offer this. And it again has changed my life, my teaching and my practice, and my ability to feel deeply for people. So
Wonderful. One last question about the caregivers, because I feel like many caregivers are never, ever, ever put into the equation. Never. No matter what, you know, really who you're caring for, whether it's for a child that has special needs, you know, or somebody that's dealt with someone taking care of their spouse with cancer. How does this program help the caregiver? Because it's so important.
Absolutely. So they added that caregiver component because Adam, who is Kevin's brother, Kevin's the one who had the TBI, Adam, when his brother did get a TBI and he realized like, oh my gosh, like the rehabilitation for this is like really intense. Adam quit his job and became Kevin's full-time caregiver. Yeah, so going to all his appointments, doing therapy with him. So they found that having that, you know, that caregiver support was so huge that they wanted to make it a really big part of the program. So it allows caregivers to relax themselves. We'll usually encourage caregivers to set up on another side of the room as the person that they give care for, so that they can really, you know, not worry about how that person is doing and really just focus on themselves. And they also bring a really amazing component to the group discussion. And you know, they just give another lens, another view. And Love Your Brain also does retreats for just caregivers. So
there's support for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much.
Thank
really,
you.
so much success with this, your new studio, and with this program. And I love what you're doing. And, you know, I will definitely tell anybody and everybody about it. I think it's great. And for those of you that are on tonight or watching this at a later date, please go, if you know anyone that's had a traumatic brain injury, find these programs, even if you're not in Rockland County. I'm sure they're everywhere, right? Across the country.
Yep.
But it's for somebody that's dealt with working with patients like this. Everyone needs help. Everyone needs help, including the caregivers as well as the patients. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I always end with my little saying, and it's integrate health, embrace your wellness, and join the collective. Next week, I just want to introduce a woman that's coming in. Her name is Michelle Gillis. She's actually an acupuncturist that works on healthy ways of aging gracefully, shall I say. So I'm like, hi, I'm almost 50. I could use a little bit of that. But she's going to kind of work at this idea of traditional Chinese medicine and how we can age gracefully. So it's going to be another good session. So thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you.
Congratulations for all your great work.
Thank you so much. I will.